This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Richard Nta in Nairobi. Here's what's ahead. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden look to hold their first virtual summit next week. And negotiations into climate change deal to continue Saturday after summit missed Friday deadline. Sudan's Khartoum state announces closure of bridges ahead of planned demonstrations on Saturday. Once again, welcome to The World Today. Let's begin with China-U.S. relations as Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet with U.S. President Joe Biden via video link on Tuesday, Beijing time. The Chinese Foreign Ministry says the two presidents will exchange views on ties and issues of mutual concern. The summit gives an opportunity for both leaders to try to cooperate on global issues. CGTN's Nathan King looks at what's at stake for this high-profile meeting.
While running for president, Joe Biden said he'd met President Xi many times and knew him well. But after 10 months in office, the two leaders of the world's two biggest economies have had just two phone calls. While politically opposite to the Trump administration, the Biden White House has largely continued hostile policies against China, from keeping in place trade tariffs to building military and diplomatic alliances in the Asia-Pacific region that Beijing says are designed to contain China. The first meeting between Chinese and U.S. top diplomats in Alaska this March was rancorous. Washington openly critical of China over Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Taiwan, China accusing the U.S. of violating China's sovereignty. The Biden administration has also pushed, with limited success, allies in Europe to sideline China and Chinese companies in supply chains, technology and trade, and to pressure Beijing on human rights too. The revival of the so-called Quad grouping of India, Japan, Australia and the US, with the first ever leaders summit held at the White House in September, also helped to raise tensions.
Well, good morning from Australia.
And in the same month, a new security pact with Australia and the UK, known as AUKUS, and it plans to deliver nuclear submarines to Canberra and cooperate on military technology going forward. And tensions over Taiwan have also escalated. The US has deployed military trainers to the island. Beijing and the US and its allies have increased military activity in the Taiwan Strait. The US adherence to the One China policy was also called into question after President Biden indicated a possible security guarantee for Taipei. That has since been walked back.
I've spoken with Xi about Taiwan. We agree we'll abide by the Taiwan agreement. That's where we are, and we made it clear that I don't think he should be doing anything other than abiding by the agreement.
But amid the tension, some signs of a diplomatic thaw. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met recently with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan for 6 hours of talks in Switzerland. China and the U.S. also released a surprise statement of cooperation on climate change at the COP26 meetings in Glasgow. And the release of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou from Canadian custody also helped ease tensions somewhat. The US has also renewed its presence at the ASEAN, East Asian and APEC summits, but has not joined any of the regional trade pacts that are helping drive the Asia-Pacific's economic recovery. While this meeting or summit success is far from guaranteed, it comes potentially at an auspicious time after the climate talks in Glasgow, Scotland, and also the intense Asian diplomacy about the economic recovery. Also, just hot on the heels of the 6th plenum of the 19th Party Congress in China, which charts China's development future. Now, while both countries agree that they can compete vigorously against each other, they and the world knows that the planet is better off where the two biggest economies and powers in the world cooperate. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
Let's turn our attention to Sudan now, where the United States and European powers have denounced the naming of a new ruling council led by Sudan's military leader. They have urged restoring Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and the civilian-led transitional government. General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan, who dissolved the government on October 25th, named a new transitional council on Thursday, reappointing himself as the head. The council excludes the main bloc demanding a transfer to civilian rule. The U.S., EU, Britain, Norway, and Switzerland said in a joint statement that they were, quote, gravely concerned by the move and that it complicated efforts to restore a transition to democracy. They also urged security forces to respect the rights of Sudanese citizens to freely express their views, close quote, ahead of another round of demonstrations planned for Saturday. The chief of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said on Friday that people from his home region of Tigray in northern Ethiopia were dying of hunger and lack of access to medicine because of what he called a systematic blockade.
People are dying because of lack of supplies. We cannot send supplies and medicine to Tigray because it's under blockade, and the blockade is systematic. So no medicine, people are dying, no food, people are starving, no telecommunication, they're isolated from the rest of the world.
Ghebreyesus, who was Ethiopia's former health minister, was speaking on Friday to reporters at the WHO headquarters in Geneva. He said assistance from the WHO and other aid organizations to the region had shrunk to almost nothing as Tigray remains isolated. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government has been locked in a year-long war with the Tigray People Liberation Front, or the TPLF. The fighters have gained control of some key cities and have not ruled out a possible march on the capital, Addis Ababa. The TPLF has called for an end to what the UN describes as a de facto humanitarian blockade on Tigray. No aid has gone into the region by road since October. Last week, the government imposed a nationwide state of emergency for 6 months, leading to mass arrests that have further hampered the aid response. The UN summit COP26 has missed a Friday deadline to reach a deal on stemming global warming. The UK hosts say they expect negotiations to continue into Saturday. Nawee Jarber-Kale has more from London.
Friday was the planned deadline for this COP26 summit as almost 200 countries look to agree on a way to protect the planet. In a bid to achieve that, an updated draft deal has softened the language around some of the key demands, especially on the use of coal and fossil fuels.
If it doesn't get across the line, it's only going to be because of a lack of political will, political determination and political leadership. And this generation of young people are watching. Let's not let them down.
Another important issue is who pays for climate change policies. Poorer countries want richer ones to offer them more help, as developed nations have historically contributed more to global emissions. The latest text calls for funding to be ramped up, but doesn't include an annual review of pledges. Many developing countries hope such a clause would put more pressure on donors.
12 years ago, rich countries made the pledge of $100 billion every year by 2020 for developing countries to tackle climate change. It still hasn't been met. This has greatly damaged political mutual trust. The success of COP26 will be hinged on whether the pledges can be met. Rich countries have yet to show their sincerity and commitment to honor their pledges.
Protesters, though, are demanding far more ambition and action. Around the city of Glasgow, a last-ditch effort to make their voices heard. For many climate activists, the international consensus being worked on here won't be enough to limit the impacts of global warming.
I don't think it's enough. I think we wanted more and we needed to see stronger action, but still has some bits that are important, like a call for countries to revise 2030 targets by next year. We think the text now is a floor. It's the absolute floor. We would like to see it improved, but still has some baby steps there.
This updated deal has made some vital concessions. It may be a matter of just a few words, but by giving countries more time to wean off fossil fuels, for example, or calling for a commitment to net zero by 2050, it's essentially hoping to ease any major concerns. In fact, this entire process has been a major balancing act, trying to incorporate different national needs, aspirations, political systems and economies, and getting them to agree on a common cause. What comes out of Glasgow may be a feat of diplomacy at a time when the world seems fractured, but it may not be enough to meet that crucial 1.5-degree target. Naweed Jabakil, CGTN, Glasgow.
Thousands of migrants are stranded at the border between Belarus and Poland trying to enter the European Union. They are camping in the cold, triggering concerns of a humanitarian crisis. One migrant described the hardship the group is facing. Let's take a listen.
We're calling on concerned parties. We want an official from the government to come here. We're stranded in this mess. There are disabled people and children among us. There are children who are 1 to 2 years old, as well as pregnant women. We don't have food. The conditions here are terrible. We are burning trees from the forest to light bonfires and warm ourselves.
The Polish border guard said over 17,000 illegal attempts to cross the border were made in October, more than double in the previous month. Poland has refused additional support from the EU's border agency Frontex, arguing it has a sufficiently large border force of its own to do the job. The head of Frontex says he sees no swift end to the migrant crisis, and the EU must be prepared to face an increase of migrants trying to enter the bloc.
I think we have to be prepared to face an increase of the number of potential migrants that would like to enter the EU. So that's what we have to prepare.
But would those migrants be coming from Belarus?
Yes, they would be coming from Belarus, also because there are many migrants who are already in Belarus.
Well, NATO said it's on the alert for any escalation in the situation on its members' borders with Belarus after Belarusian and Russian paratroopers staged joint drills near the Polish and Lithuanian borders. NATO has labeled the migrant crisis a provocative move by the Belarusian government, which it claimed was encouraging migrants to cross into the EU. Its president, Alexander Lukashenko, has denied the accusations. Well, I guess that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching. See you soon.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan's Khartoum state announces closure of bridges ahead of planned demonstrations Saturday. World powers meet on Libya's crisis to push elections. And negotiations into a climate change deal to continue Saturday after summit missed Friday deadline. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi, and for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. In business, Ghana's debt rises above 75% of the GDP, causing concern among economists. And in sports, uncertainty engulfs Kenya's football after the government dissolved the football body. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with us for this hour. Let's begin in Sudan, where the United States and European powers have denounced the naming of a new ruling council led by Sudan's military leader. They have urged restoring Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and the civilian-led transition government. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who dissolved the government on October the 25th, named a new transitional council on Thursday, reappointing himself as the head. The council excludes the main bloc, demanding a transfer to civilian rule. The U.S., EU, Britain, Norway, and Switzerland said in a joint statement that they were, quote, gravely concerned by the move and that it complicated efforts to restore a transition to democracy. They also urged security forces to respect the rights of Sudanese citizens to freely express their views, close quote, ahead of another round of demonstrations planned for Saturday. World powers have called for peaceful, free, and fair elections in Libya at a summit in Paris intended to secure backing for the North African country's planned polls in 6 weeks' time. Leaders from Libya, Egypt, France, Germany, and Italy were in attendance at the meeting, along with the U.S. Vice President. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged Libyans to participate in the polls as well as accept the results. However, the poll date of December the 24th remains in doubt as rival Libyan factions and political bodies are in dispute over the election calendar and who will manage the process. French President Macron called for departure of foreign mercenaries from Libya. Meanwhile, Libyan interim Prime Minister Abdelhamid Dbeibeh said he is ready to hand over power to whoever Libya chooses. The chief of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said on Friday that people from his home region of Tigray in northern Ethiopia were dying of hunger and lack of access to medicine because of what he called a systematic blockade.
People are dying because of lack of supplies. We cannot send supplies and medicine to Tigray because it's under blockade, and the blockade is systematic. So no medicine, people are dying, no food, people are starving, no telecommunication, they're isolated from the rest of the world.
Ghebreyesus, who was Ethiopia's former health minister, was speaking on Friday to reporters at the WHO headquarters in Geneva. He said assistance from the WHO and other aid organizations to the region had shrunk to, quote, almost nothing, close quote, as Tigray remains isolated. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government has been locked in a year-long war with the Tigray's People Liberation Front, or TPLF. The fighters have gained control of some key cities and have not ruled out a possible march on the capital, Addis Ababa. The TPLF has called for an end to what the UN describes as a de facto humanitarian blockade on Tigray. No aid has gone into the region by road since October. Last week, the government imposed a nationwide state of emergency for 6 months, leading to mass arrests that have further hampered the aid process. Let's bring in William Davidson, a senior analyst at Ethiopia International Crisis Group. He joins us from Nairobi. Sir, welcome to the program. First and foremost, picking from those concerns raised by the WHO that no aid has gone into Tigray by road since October, what can be done in the short term to unlock the impasse, at least just so crucial supplies can reach those most in need? How do you see it?
The problem here is the overall quantity of aid being supplied. So, since June, when the federal government was forced out of Tigray, the federal military and administration, there has been very insufficient supply of aid to the region. There is only one land corridor. There's many bureaucratic impediments put in place. There was also no banking, telecoms, or electricity services. So sometimes we see trucks get permission, but it is very insufficient. We may see soon some trucks move to Tigray, but there is an estimate from the UN that only around 10 to 15% of the needed aid is reaching the region. So really we need a very significant sort of sea change in attitude from the federal government here in order to prevent a famine inside the Tigray region.
William, picking up on what you've just said, even with threat of sanctions, the conflict is still ongoing. What can be done to solve the crisis in the long term?
That's a very difficult question. I think we have to take this step by step. At the moment, the Tigray leadership and commanders believe they're in a very significant military advantage. They've taken control of major cities in Amhara consistently since July, eastern Amhara. They're about 200 to 300 kilometers from Addis Ababa. They're also pressuring the Djibouti road, Ethiopia's main trade corridor, so they could potentially choke Addis Ababa. Unless the federal government is willing to make some very significant concessions, I think facilitating aid to Tigray, maybe a political amnesty for jailed opposition leaders as well, then we're going to see the Tigray forces continue to maximize the pressure here.
All right, William Davison, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your insight and analysis. Much appreciated. The news continues on Africa Live. We will see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. South Africans continue to reflect on the legacy of former President F.W. de Klerk, who died on Thursday. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for joining us. The UN Climate Summit COP26 missed a Friday deadline to reach a deal on stemming global warming. The UK hosts say they expect negotiations to continue into Saturday. Now, Jarba Kale has more from London.
Friday was the planned deadline for this COP26 summit as almost 200 countries look to agree on a way to protect the planet. In a bid to achieve that, an updated draft deal has softened the language around some of the key demands, especially on the use of coal and fossil fuels.
If it doesn't get across the line, it's only going to be because of a lack of political will, political determination and political leadership. And this generation of young people are watching. Let's not let them down.
Another important issue is who pays for climate change policies. Poorer countries want richer ones to offer them more help, as developed nations have historically contributed more to global emissions. The latest text calls for funding to be ramped up, but doesn't include an annual review of pledges. Many developing countries hope such a clause would put more pressure on donors.
12 years ago, rich countries made the pledge of $100 billion every year by 2020 for developing countries to tackle climate change. It still hasn't been met. This has greatly damaged political mutual trust. The success of COP26 will be hinged on whether the pledges can be met. Rich countries have yet to show their sincerity and commitment to honor their pledges.
整个大会进程的一个核心的问题。
Protesters, though, are demanding far more ambition and action. Around the city of Glasgow, a last-ditch effort to make their voices heard. For many climate activists, the international consensus being worked on here won't be enough to limit the impacts of global warming.
I don't think it's enough. I think we wanted more and we needed to see stronger action, but still has some bits that are important, like a call for countries to revise 2030 targets by next year. We think the text now is a floor. It's the absolute floor. We would like to see it improved, but still has some baby steps there.
This updated deal has made some vital concessions. It may be a matter of just a few words, but by giving countries more time to wean off fossil fuels, for example, or calling for a commitment to net zero by 2050, it's essentially hoping to ease any major concerns. In fact, this entire process has been a major balancing act, trying to incorporate different national needs, aspirations, political systems and economies, and getting them to agree on a common cause.
What comes out of Glasgow may be a feat of diplomacy at a time when the world seems fractured, but it may not be enough to meet that crucial 1.5-degree target. Naweed Jabakil, CGTN, Glasgow.
To South Africa, where the country continues to reflect on the legacy left behind by former apartheid-era President F.W. de Klerk, who died in Cape Town on Thursday. The 85-year-old leader was a polarizing figure to many in South Africa. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more with this report.
In the final video message released after his death, apartheid-era South African President F.W. de Klerk apologized for the pain apartheid brought on people of color. The late statesman said since the early 1980s, his views have changed completely, and he knew in his heart that apartheid was wrong.
I, without qualification, apologize for the pain and the hurt and the indignity and the damage that apartheid has done to black, brown and Indians in South Africa.
Since de Klerk's passing, the legacy he has left behind has been thrust back into the national social discourse, and many people continue to have strong feelings about him, either in support or against. Some political analysts, though, believe it is important to note some of the contributions he brought to end apartheid.
He was the one who had the moral courage to take the steps P.W. Botha refused to unban all the banned political parties from the ANC to the Communist Party, and to release Mandela from prison and to start the negotiations.
On the streets, many people are still digesting news of his death and what that means for the country. Former South African State President F.W. de Klerk's death has drawn mixed reactions amongst Cape Townians, who still remain divided on the legacy he leaves behind.
People can say that apartheid years, yeah, he was there for that and all that, and for all the people who believes in him, but surely I don't, because he done nothing according to South Africa, supporting South Africa and all that.
I admired him. I think this country's transition could have been quite chaotic without his guidance. So I'm sorry he passed away. You know, good thoughts to him.
He died with a lot of secrets. He should have revealed the secrets before he did. But it's a pity, he just apologized and he caused it pain. But he should have revealed all those people that are involved with atrocity of apartheid.
For now, plans for de Klerk's funeral will soon be released, but his foundation says it's likely to be a family burial attended by close family and friends. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
The Nigerian government is coming under mounting pressure to declare members of criminal gangs terrorists. Advocates argue this would allow Nigeria's security services to expand their remit and bring the growing threat from bandits under control. Others claim labeling criminal gangs terrorists isn't fair or justified. Our correspondent Tessa McKenday reports from Jos.
Solomon Moren is a lawyer in Jos, north central Nigeria. Solomon, like many residents of this region, is worried about his community's safety, owing to the destruction of lives and property by criminal gangs. He argues they deserve to be branded terrorists. which will enable security operatives to deal with them more effectively.
I think we should now have to call them terrorists because they are just doing the same thing that terrorists do. The difference is that just like we see the military, reinforcing their artillery to fight the terrorists in the northeast, as we see today, that we were told there is a technical defeat. So probably we could have that kind of agility in the fight against bandits if they are declared terrorists.
Many Nigerians like Solomon are disappointed their calls are going unheeded.
Should go about killing, maiming, destroying property of people, disseminating a whole community without anything being done. It means that we have come to the point that the government should be able to call a spade a spade.
I feel it's time for government to declare bandits terrorists because once you do that, the law will take its course on them because they are going extra mile and doing so many things that are wrong.
Criminal gangs in Nigeria are involved in kidnappings for ransom, murders, livestock theft and destruction of property. The United Nations says more than 300 students were abducted in the country's Katsina state in December last year. Authorities in the northwest state of Kaduna say 343 people were killed, 830 kidnapped, and 210 were killed by criminal gangs in the state alone between July and September this year.
If you want the government to declare them as terrorists, they must have a nomenclature that can be declared. And that is a name. They must have a structure that can be declared so that the people in it are identifiable. They are being given the treatment that, terrorists are given. They are arrested, they are neutralized, like they mention in the military circle these days. You understand? Their camps are raided, are bombed. Bombardments are ongoing in their camps. So they are being treated as terrorists.
Security experts are calling on the Nigerian government to strengthen its security structures. They say only then will the fight against the criminal gangs be successful.
We have a challenge of inadequate manpower. You understand? By United Nations, I think I mentioned this a couple of times. By United Nations charter, you are expected to have like 1% of your population as your standing army. And of course you expect that we have more than that as police. In other climes you have county, state, before you have the federal police. Here we only have the federal police. Technology, yes. Technology too can help. The use of drones and so on and so forth.
The Nigerian government says it is committed to defeating criminal gangs in the country. President Muhammadu Buhari in March this year directed security agencies to shoot anyone in illegal possession of weapons as the government clamps down on criminal gangs who have refused to surrender. Some state governments in the country, especially in its northern region, are also trying to coordinate more while beefing up legislation for state policing. Many Nigerians like Solomon Moren hope these efforts will pay off someday, which will be a significant step in creating a more secure environment. Tessem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
Benin has welcomed home 26 artifacts which were looted during French colonial rule more than 130 years ago. The royal artifacts were returned following negotiations between France's President Emmanuel Macron and Benin's President Patrice Talon. CGTN's Deji Badamosi has more on that story.
The very moment the first box containing the artifacts was unloaded. There are 3 trucks in all carrying the boxes containing the 26 royal artifacts. Hundreds have come to the presidential palace to give the artifacts a royal reception. Virtually all the 26 artifacts are said to be royal treasures looted from the Abome Palace in the ancient kingdom of Dahomey in modern-day southern Benin.
de l'actuel président de la République française.
The return of these artifacts represents the return of the greatest values taken out of our land. This is historic. It helps the current generation of our people to see and understand the culture and work of their ancestors and ensure they are maintained.
Mieux, nos félicitations.
The return of the artifacts is the outcome of several years of negotiations and mounting calls on former colonial powers to return looted artifacts in museums across Europe.
We will continue this fight because it's important for us, for our development. It's important for Benin, for our future. And I'm sure that in Nigeria, in Togo, in Ivory Coast, in Mali, and so on, I'm sure that people will stand up and will ask for the same thing.
The government says the artifacts will remain in the sealed boxes and kept in a special room for the next 2 to 3 months to allow them acclimatize with the Benin environment before they are then displayed for people to see at different parts of the country.
This item will come back, can go to the museum.
The artifacts can be taken to the museum, but we on our part would have to carry out a purification process. We have to purify the palaces the artifacts were stolen from. Whether the items come back to the palace or not, we have to do rituals to appease the ancestors and to welcome the artifacts because they have a soul of their own.
We have to talk to ancestors.
The artifacts are expected to eventually end up in a museum which is currently being built in Abomey with the assistance of the French government. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Cotonou, Benin.
A young Senegalese writer has received an honorary award in Senegal for winning a top literature prize in France. Mohamed Bougar Sarr has been recognized for his 5th novel that has placed him as the first laureate from sub-Saharan Africa and one of the youngest writers to receive the Prix Goncourt.
A young Senegalese writer was awarded this week the Prix Goncourt, France's leading literature prize. At 31, Mohamed Mbougar is the first sub-Saharan African to win the literary award.
It is a reaffirmation of the Senegalese culture and of the place that culture occupies in this country, which is an extremely high place and one by which this country has always been recognized. I'm much more touched because my family was here, not for the award as such, because all awards are quite equal in my mind and have the same meaning, but the moments when we share them are always different.
Senegalese President Macky Sall has recognized the French award as an illustration of the tradition of excellence among Senegalese writers. The winning novel, The Most Secret Memory of Men, is Sarr's 5th.
I always felt that he deserved it and that one day he could be with the President of the Republic, and I always wanted to be with him. Yes, he loved reading so much that he had a yearly subscription, and at the end of every month he would pick up his Mickey book and devour it in a few days.
The Prix Goncourt is determined by a jury of 10, and laureates take home just under $12 in prize money. However, winners are traditionally guaranteed the sale of hundreds of thousands of books. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
The news continues on Africa Live. We will see you on the other side of the break with our business segment. Here's a peek at the headlines. Investors in South Africa welcome the first budget presided over Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. Ghana's debt rises above 75% of the GDP, causing concern among economists.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thank you for sticking with us. South Africa's rand strengthened early on Friday as investors cautiously welcomed the first budget presided over by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. The unit strengthened as much as 1.6% and traded at 1.2% higher in Johannesburg, and that's after the country's treasury vowed to return state finances to a sustainable path and hold off expanding welfare measures. According to investing professionals, though, nothing significant has changed, but Godongwana hit the right note by emphasizing the need for deficit and debt reduction. The minister has been in the position for just over 3 months, but has pledged to reduce debt and grow the economy. Godongwana's policy statement has been described as a good attempt to steady the country's finances and appease investors. Richard Nta has more details.
Critical to the fiscal path we've chosen is the need to be clear and unambiguous on the trade-offs we're willing to make as a nation. We cannot do everything we want at the same time. Equally important is the faster implementation of structural reforms to unlock greater private sector investment, economic growth and job creation.
South Africa's debt is sitting at $266 billion. Servicing that debt remains the largest spend in the budget at $24 billion. The public service wage bill is another big expense. Two areas that investors are concerned about.
I think what the finance minister is doing at the moment is he's planning for a narrowing of the fiscal deficit while trying to very adequately balance the need for spending to continue.
The minister was frank about the fact that 60% of the budget's non-interest spending goes towards social development.
Today, 27.8 million South Africans are social grant recipients of one or another. This accounts for about 46% of our population. At the same time, the number of people working has declined, further underlining the critical flaws in our economy. Our total spending on the social wage is also very high.
I think we have to be realistic that we cannot afford the social wage bill that we pay, the health, the education, the RDP houses, the free water and lights that many people get. We can't afford that forever and a day. To me, that was an enlightening moment, I think, for the country to realize how much money is already going to people.
The new minister was also firm on structural reforms and also acknowledged the country's electricity crisis.
These reforms should focus on improving competitiveness, productivity, investment, and employment. Our first and immediate task in this regard must be to ensure stable energy supply, reduce the risk of load shedding, and accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources.
It seems Enoch Godongwana's first speech was well received. He had the right tone, emphasizing the need for a market-friendly approach to growth and calling for more public-private partnerships. Whether all of this will translate into action remains to be seen.
He's talking a very strong language and bringing the private sector closer to the center of government. If we look at most economies, they are mixed economies, but in our case, the government has not been efficient. If we can bring in better efficiencies that the private sector can bring, there will be benefits to us.
While tax revenues are higher this year, the minister was clear that the commodities windfall could be temporary. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Staying in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced that the country has secured an $8.5 billion international climate finance deal to accelerate the country's transition away from coal to renewable energy sources. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with the details.
The funding is a bid to transition from coal towards green energy. It's a partnership between South Africa, the US, the UK, France, Germany and the European Union.
The funds at this stage are allocated to 3 areas. The first is for the Eskom Just Energy Transition, which we expect to receive the lion's share of this first initial allocation of funds, and as well to support the introduction of electric vehicles into South Africa, as well as a transition to an increasingly hydrogen-based economy.
Following the announcement at the COP26 talks in Glasgow, authorities have moved quickly.
A technical task team has already been established under the leadership of the presidency. The presidency has nominated a senior official to coordinate and lead that technical task team, and negotiations will commence, I am told, very shortly.
Climate change activists are hopeful that the loan will achieve its goal, but there are concerns too.
It's a really positive agreement, but at the same time it is a political agreement. So what remains to be seen is how exactly they'll flesh out that agreement, what the details will look like, how fast we'll be transitioning, what they will fund, and what the conditions of that funding will be.
And then there are the concerns over the position taken by the country's mineral and energy minister on the future of coal-fired power stations.
Minister Richard Nta, just a few days after the agreement, went on a big international platform and talked about how we have to be fighting against the anti-fossil fuel agenda. Given that he is the most powerful minister in charge of our energy, it's a worrying sign that he's pushing back against what is supposed to be progress for South Africa.
While the news has been welcomed, there are questions around Eskom and whether it can fulfill its requirements, considering its history and the overruns in budget and time allocation for Medupi and Kusile power stations. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Ghana's debt is rising, causing economists to be concerned over the country's ability to get more loans and support its economy next year. The West African country's debt owed to the international capital market is now more than $13 billion, which is above 75% of the country's gross domestic product. Some analysts want the government to seek a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rofai reports from Accra.
Ghana's total debt is currently more than $54 billion, about 76% of its gross domestic product. The government says the increase in debt is due to a $3 billion loan acquired from the international capital market in April, which was used to offset old debts and also fund infrastructure development. Analysts say it could be difficult for Ghana to pay back as the interest on the loans go up.
When you are choked with debt, what do? Don't you stop borrowing? And how would you stop borrowing? It's a matter of what? Making sure that you cut your coat according to your size. Making sure that you limit unnecessary expenditure.
The government says it will borrow from the international capital market to support its economic growth, but some analysts want the government to seek a bailout from the IMF.
Now, if you go to IMF, the cost will be that, okay, fine, don't spend up to this level. Don't employ up to this level. If you can absorb this cost, right, relative to going to borrow on the Eurobond market and then carrying some interest rate, I mean, cost-efficient analysis, you go for the minimum one. So that's the analysis I'll put on the table. And if I realize that going to IMF will be cheaper for the economy, I'll go to IMF.
Still, there are concerns that Ghana may not be able to acquire loans from the international capital market next year due to its struggling economy. International research firm Red Intelligence says Ghana may consider seeking debt relief from the G20 countries. While credit ratings agencies Fitch and Moody's have downgraded the country's economy to negative, the World Bank has urged the government to rein in spending and consider increasing tax revenues to avoid defaulting on its debts. Nabil Ahmed Rofai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
A row over fish exports is brewing between Kenya and Uganda. The dispute follows the seizure of 5 Kenyan trucks carrying fish destined to the DR Congo. The owners of the impounded fish are seeking intervention from leaders of both countries. CGTN's Hilary Ayasiga reports.
These trucks loaded with fish have been parked here at the Ugandan border for close to 3 weeks. The Kenyan owners are not happy with the Ugandan authorities for impounding their goods worth thousands of dollars.
They broke the seals. We were not there. We don't know where they got an order of breaking our seals. The goods were on transit. We don't sell fish in Uganda. Our goods are on transit to DRC Congo.
They are now demanding the immediate release of their goods.
We went to a commissioner, a high commissioner. The report is there everywhere. And we were expecting the feedback to give us so that they release our trucks to DRC Congo.
But Ugandan authorities insist it's contraband.
The increased trade of immature fish to DRC Congo, with some of it first taken to Kenya, repacked and passed through Ugandan borders and put fish on transit.
Ugandan authorities claim the traders connive with customs officials to smuggle the immature fish through Uganda, and they are determined to fight the vice.
We are going to have abrupt inspectors at any time, beginning from today. We are going to make sure that we have people that we deploy at any time to check why the increasing illegal fishing is taking place.
Ugandan fisheries authorities have recently reported a decline in the country's fish exports attributed to illegal fishing practices. Figures from Bank of Uganda show that fish exports dropped from $10.6 million in January 2021 to $6.6 million in July 2021. Fish is one of Uganda's top foreign exchange earners. The government believes stamping out illegal trade in immature fish could help boost exports. But economic analysts argue the current standoff with Kenyan traders could strain relations between the two countries. Hilary Yesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Don't go away. Here's what's ahead. Uncertainty engulfs Kenyan football after the government dissolved the football body.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa.